Right, so the big question we're asking you, South Africa, at the moment today is, do you have a will? The late Zulu King's will that is being contested, and how this has raised awareness as to the importance of having a valid will in place and the potential pitfalls to look out for when drafting your will. It is also announced that President Cyril Ramaphosa has approved the amended customary marriages bill, which will also affect the validity of the wills, right? So here to help us unpack this for us is Brandon Garbutt, who is the Managing Director of Capital Legacy. Brendan, a very good morning. I started my intro with a very simple question, but it's a tricky one for a lot of people, right? When you ask someone, do you have a will? Most of the time, the likely answer is no, I don't.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, William. Thanks a lot for inviting me on the show. Yes, at Capital Legacy, we're often doing talks about the will and making sure that your will is valid and up to date.
Right.
And unfortunately in South Africa, if you actually look at the stats, over 75% of South Africans don't actually have a valid and up-to-date will in place. And I think everyone says to me, what is the reason for that? And I always say, I think South Africans have the Superman complex, where you kind of think it'll never happen to me. And unfortunately, I think COVID's actually brought in light that it actually can happen to you. And that's why we're just trying to urge people and try and bring to light that 75% of South Africans don't have it. It's easy to get it done, and it's generally procrastination that actually stops South Africans doing it.
And that 75% number is scary for me right now, because I think about the late Zulu King, right? And everything that's happened since the Queen passed on, because everything was okay in terms of his will. Everyone knew what needed to happen. But then the Queen passed on. It seemed and sounded like, for us who were reporting on the story, like, yes, there was a plan B. The plan B has fallen through. Now nobody knows what to do. What do you say to something like that?
So, it's been a very, as you say, a highly contested case in South Africa, and quite an interesting one. If you just take a step back, when the Zulu King unfortunately passed away, it was said in his original will that he actually passed the reins, or if we can call it that, onto the Queen.
Yes.
And unfortunately, she passed away 2 weeks later, and in her will, she actually said she passed on to her eldest son. This has obviously been contested by his first wife and her 2 daughters. And there's things like they're saying that his signed will wasn't valid and he was coaxed into doing it. And now it's obviously gone to court.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the Zulu Kingdom actually sits now without a king. So it's these kind of things that a proper, up-to-date will, that everyone actually understands what's actually in the will, is so important. And I know we talk about the Zulu King, but I actually see this very much in real life.
So these are things that happen to people often.
100%. And what we see a lot is people have 2 things. They actually have their will or lack of their will, and then they have their financial planning that they actually obviously do with the financial planner.
Right.
But often the 2 don't talk to each other. And what we always try and say, especially Capital Legacy, is to just say that make sure that your will and your financial plan do talk to each other, so that when you do pass on, what your intentions are from a will perspective in terms of the assets that you want to leave to your loved ones or beneficiaries is actually what actually happens in the end. Because if there's no will in place and you pass away interstate, there's a law of succession within South Africa of actually how those assets have to be disposed of, which is not maybe what your intention was.
Right.
So that's why we always encourage that you need to get your will in place.
And speaking practically, Brandon, let's say I'm hearing this information, I'm finding it interesting, but it's new information right now. What do I need to do to get the financials speak into the will? First step.
So, as you say, all good financial planning actually starts off from a will perspective.
Right.
I always joke with everyone. I always say, you might lie to your financial planner, but you never lie in your will. Okay.
Yes.
People are always very honest in their will.
Yeah.
So get your will in place first, because that speaks to actually what your intentions are when you pass away.
Okay.
People are always worried about how do I go about it and things along those lines. And there's a lot of institutions or companies that are coming out now, especially online, allowing you to do your will online.
Right.
And I commend anyone that actually encourages wills in South Africa, because we've got such a ratio of people who don't have. My only reservation is make sure when you do a will, it's with the people who are going to be winding up your estate. Because a will can look very fancy on the front end.
Right.
But remember, you've got to wind that will up when you eventually pass away. And you want the company who's actually there at the cold front when you're drafting the will to be the ones who are winding it up at the end. And that's what we call integration.
Okay.
So that the company, when they're winding up the estate, they know what your intentions were when you actually wrote the will in the first place.
When we talk about the common mistakes that people often make when drafting a will, what are those, Brendan?
So there's many mistakes that people often make. Is a simple one is if you're a beneficiary within a will, you actually cannot sign as a witness. And unfortunately,
what do you mean?
Get that. So if you are going to be getting something within the will, if you're going to get one of the assets that are left in the will,
right?
Obviously, a will has to be witnessed by someone, and often people get a person who's a beneficiary to actually sign as a witness. For instance, if you're leaving money to your kids actually cannot be the ones to actually sign the will or witness the will with you.
I see, right.
It actually constitutes as it's invalid.
Yeah.
So it's small nuances like that people obviously don't realize. But what we do obviously at Capital Legacy is when we actually go and do the consultation, because we believe in face-to-face consultation. It's a nice way of getting to understand what the person actually wants.
Yeah.
Is at the end we actually give you guidelines on actually how to sign the will and make sure that it's valid. You need to sign it, needs to be witnessed on every single page. Obviously, as I said, no beneficiaries are allowed to sign it as witnesses.
Right.
The original will needs to actually be presented to the master to obviously get that put through as the original will. It's just things like this that we actually guide individuals through the whole process.
There's this misconception that a lot of people believe that you need a lot of money or a lot of assets to actually have a will. Is that so or not?
No. So again, there's some big misconceptions in South Africa, and something that we've been trying to change over the last decade.
Right.
Is people believe that you have to be a multimillionaire or you have to have millions of assets and things like that. But a will is not just about assets and money. It's about how you want to see your loved ones looked after when you pass away. Okay. And that might be who's going to be the guardian looking after your kids if they're minors. It might be certain properties. It might be some assets that you want to look after. You don't have to be a wealthy multi-millionaire. And the nice thing about a will is it actually just makes it a lot easier when the executor winds up their estate. They know what the intentions are and they can execute it based on those intentions. Because we often see when there's no will in place, the amount of family fighting, the feuds that go on, and then you have to that's when it starts going to the courts and things like that. Because if there's a will, people might not be happy, but the guidelines are there of what the person actually intended to actually happen. As I said, it could be assets, it can be guardianship, or, everything in terms of how you want to see your family looked after when you go.
And in wrapping up our conversation, Brandon, just in 30 seconds, I know cryptocurrency is a big thing at the moment now, and people are starting to put that as part of their will. How does all of that work?
So it's very interesting. I mean, I've been seeing all the articles that have been flying in all of a sudden about cryptocurrencies and how is that part of your estate?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, up until now, it's been a way for people to actually hide their kind of wealth within cryptocurrency. But now it's been coming out from a SARS perspective that SARS are starting to investigate this.
Okay.
And they are looking at that people need to actually declare cryptocurrencies when they're doing their annual tax returns. And when you pass away, cryptocurrencies will be seen as part of your estate, which is very important. Up until now, there's no way of actually checking on it, but the legislation is going to come in the same as Europe, that it's going to form part of your estate. It forms part of an asset within your estate. And SARS will start looking at that as something that they're going to be taxing you on.
Listen, very informative this morning. Thank you so much for your time.
Cool. Thanks a lot, William, and thanks a lot for the viewers.
That is Brendan Garbutt speaking to us this morning about your will. Is it in place? If not, contact Capital Legacy.